So today we are back with a brand new character analysis, and for this video we have the newest character, Tove. Tove is not the most complicated character, and at this point, a lot of you most likely know, or at least have a good idea of what she actually does. So I think that we don't have to spend too much time reading her skills. Instead, we're gonna focus more on her practical application, how much value she is providing, who this character is actually for, and pretty much everything else that I found while testing out this character. So basically, Tove is a burst 1 support for the majority of shotgun-focused teams. And I say majority because even though she's made to be a support for shotgun teams, not every single shotgun character is going to necessarily benefit from her buffs. Tove increases her allies' max ammo capacity, but this is only effective for some of the shotgun units that we have. Some characters have a last bullet mechanic, so max ammo increase is not going to be the best buff for them. With that being said, the downside of having more ammo is actually not too bad, because they are also getting other buffs that help negate the downsides of having max ammo increase. Take for example Annie's Sparkling Summer. Her second skill activates whenever she fires her last bullet. But even so, the damage she is losing from having increased ammo capacity is actually not too bad. During my testing against the first boss in the most recent raid, Annie's Sparkling Summer deals 130 million damage when I'm using her with Tove. And using the same team, but replacing Tove with Pepper, someone who doesn't provide any damage buff, Annie's Sparkling Summer is doing about the same damage as before. I've run this test for both teams multiple times, and the biggest damage difference that I got was around 3 million damage. But that could also be because of the randomness in critical hits. So what we can take from this is that, even though she's losing damage on her second skill, she is still able to dish out a good amount of damage on her normals to at least negate the negative effects of having increased ammo capacity. It's important to keep in mind that even though it technically works and Annie's Sparkling Summer is not losing damage per se, she is also not doing more damage, so it kind of defeats the purpose of having a shotgun buffer like Tove. I only recommend using this combo if you're absolutely out of options, or Annie's Sparkling Summer has elemental advantage, and you also have other shotgun DPS in your team. With that being said, my Tove currently has 944 on her skill upgrades, so if you upgrade her skills even further, then I can see the downsides being reduced to the point where Annie's Sparkling Summer is actually doing more damage when you're using Tove. But generally speaking, this is not the most optimal combo, and you are better off using Annie's Sparkling Summer in other teams. When it comes to Pepper and Marciana, their healing output has little to no difference whether you have Tove in your team or not. My Marciana is healing for about 14.6 million without Tove, and she's healing for 14.4 million with Tove in her team. So it's not really that big of a difference. And my Pepper is healing for 2 million HP without Tove, and 2.2 million HP when Tove is in her team. Sometimes having Tove equals more healing, sometimes it's less. But it's close enough to where we can say that having Tove on the same team doesn't really affect their healing output noticeably. So overall, when you think about it, Tove's max ammo increase is somewhat similar to Privity's ammo reduction effect. At first, it might seem like it's going to hold back some of the characters, simply because this is the opposite of what you would actually want to give them. But worst case scenario, it's actually going to have little to no effects on them, because the downsides are negated by the other buffs that they get. Another thing that I noticed when I was first testing her out is that Tove is a pretty expensive character. Her abilities basically revolve around her skill 1, specifically on the number of stacks that she's able to get on her temporary modification passive. The more stacks you get on this, the better buffs you get from her skill 2 and burst. Her skill 1 is going to start with a 2% chance of gaining a stack every time she's dealing damage. This can go up to 5%, but only when you get her skill 1 up to level 9. So you have to spend thousands of skill manuals in order to get the highest chance of gaining stacks on a very important part of her kit. Going from 2% up to 5% might seem like it's not that big of a difference, but based on my testing, it's actually a pretty big jump in performance because you can get her stacks more often. I still remember using her for the first time with no upgrades on her abilities, and trying to get stacks on her skill 1 with a 2% activation felt absolutely terrible. When you're using Tove, you would always want to use her burst only when she has 3 stacks on her temporary modification passive, because that is how you can get the most out of her buffs. So with that in mind, another downside for Tove is that when you are in stages where you are really trying to optimize your damage output, and it's most likely going to be against a raid boss, you might actually have to retry a couple of times to find a run where you have maximum stacks on her skill 1 before or immediately after she is able to use her burst. It can be quite frustrating because there have been a few times where my burst is off cooldown, but I still don't have maximum stacks on her skill 1. Another reason why she is expensive is because you need to get her second skill to certain levels to actually get a noticeable benefit from the attack speed buff. It's going to be a bit complicated or even confusing if I try to explain how attack speed buffs work in this game, but essentially, attack speed is based on the frame rate and the character's base weapon attack speed or firing rate. For an attack speed buff to actually be effective, you need to give the character enough additional attack speed to lower the frame at which they're going to fire their weapon. And for Tove's second skill, that basically means that her second skill has effectiveness breakpoints on levels 2, 4, 6, and 8. So you would want to upgrade her second skill to those specific levels and try to avoid the levels in between. And very quickly before we talk about her team compositions, let's first talk about how to build Tove and what stats you should be looking for. Basically, all you're looking for is max ammo capacity increase, and any other stat is going to be a plus. When it comes to Harmony Cubes, Bastion is going to be the best option, but Resilience can also be a good alternative if that's the only available slot that you have. Next up, I have a tier list of every single shotgun character in the game, and each one is placed on a tier depending on how good they synergize with Tove. And looking at this, you can only find a handful of characters that are realistically good options to use with Tove. You have the 3 characters at the very top, you also have Pepper and Marciana, and I think that's pretty much it. Your team compositions are pretty much going to revolve around these characters, not unless you decide to use a non-shotgun character for more damage or more utility. Other characters like Maiden, Isabel, Viper, and Neve can also be good options, but only if they have elemental advantage. And as for Noir, she can also be used with Tove, but if you have Blanc, then you should be using those 2 characters on teams with a better hyper carry, like Red Hood, Modernia, or Alice. As for the rest of the shotgun characters, it's either you are better off using them in other teams without Tove, or the character is simply not good enough to use in your teams. So overall, I think that Tove is a little bit ahead of her time, because currently we don't really have an insanely good top tier shotgun DPS who benefits from getting a max ammo increase. As of making this video, the best shotgun DPS that we have are Annie Sparkling Summer, Sugar, and Guilty. And as we have talked about earlier in this video, Tove doesn't really do much when it comes to increasing Annie Sparkling Summer's damage. So now you're left with Guilty and Sugar. Sugar is getting significantly buffed by Tove, but in the context of raid bosses, I don't really see why you would want to use Sugar over the other top tier DPS that we have. Maybe outside of close range bosses that are weak against iron, and stages where you have to break down the enemy shield, and a good example for that is the Material H boss fight. I honestly don't think that we need to pull for Tove. But if you are worried about not having Tove when we eventually get a crazy shotgun DPS who wants more ammo, then you can go ahead and pull for her. I would say that getting a single copy is more than enough, just for the sake of future-proofing your account. But if you're not able to get one, you don't really have to stress about it because you still have other options for a burst 1 support. So right now, Tove is pretty much only going to be used with Sugar, plus another burst type 3 DPS, and then 2 other slots for more DPS or supportive utility. Tove is only as good as available characters that we have, so I'm sure that she will definitely bring a lot more value once we get better shotgun DPS in the future.